Afternoon. My name is Shelley Gill. I am the Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management, and I want to welcome you to our conversation with the History and Political Sciences Department. So joining me is our Interim Director, Dr. Holly Wilson, Dr. Rogers, who teaches history for us, and Dr. Ordes, who teaches political science and disaster science and emergency management. And we are excited to talk with you guys a little bit about the department. So if you'll go around, just introduce yourselves, and when you do, I want to make sure that you let everyone know why did you choose to go into the area you teach, and why teach with that. So Dr. Rogers.
Hi, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm Jim Rogers. I'm a professor of history. I'm obviously marginally insane for having decided to go into history. but I must tell you, I didn't change from the beginning of my collegiate career. So it's, I've had 45 years to change. History is the most ecumenical of all the disciplines. It teaches everything else and more. So we're the least specialized, at least in terms of what it is that we think about. And we just tend to care more about that you do think than anything else. It's not so much, teaching history is really just teaching thinking. It's really all it is. It's just you happen to use stuff in the past to understand it better. There's no great a mystery about it. It's largely a field bereft of methodology and modeling and all the other thing that the so-called sciences pretend to have. We accept everybody. We're open. We like folks who think differently. That's, to us, that's the essence of what we should be like. If we were all like each other, then it'd be a boring place. So if you think that's a thing where you might find a place to live, we are welcoming you, trying to help you get there, whatever that means for you. It's kind of why history is maybe the best preparation for any kind of job, but it may not be a good way to say history prepares you for a particular job. Anyways, that's good enough.
Okay. Dr. Ordes.
Why did I pick political science? Well, at the time, the Cold War was still going on, and in the 1980s, President Reagan had decided we were going to try to flame out the Soviet Union by making them try to keep up with us economically. And communism is an inherently inefficient economic system because you cannot incentivize people to work harder or work more because they get the same apartment, the same grocery allotment, and same mass transit they would get otherwise. And so someone has to teach the American public why we're going to undergo the hardships we have to undergo while we're trying to flame out the Soviet Union. So I got into my hometown university, UNO, actually had the 7th ranked political science department in the country at the time. So without having to leave New Orleans, I was able to get a top-notch graduate education in international relations, which is really my specialty. But what I'm teaching now is mostly American government because the need for it is so desperate. Students are getting out of high school right now without having any real idea how their own government works, and they're making demands on government that are not appropriate for government to answer. So someone has to teach basically high school civics at the college level so that the leaders of tomorrow, which is our graduates, the leaders of tomorrow will have some understanding of what government can do for you and what government cannot do for you. Going back to international relations, I do get to do that in the springtime when I teach my diplomatic crisis simulation course, in which the first half of the semester is theoretical, it's classroom theory, and then the second half of the semester is practical application of those theories while the students resolve some international diplomatic crisis that they've been thrown into without creating a war, since we would all agree that wars are bad things. And So I do get to draw on my original grad school expertise, but most of my focus is just on the national government itself and state and local government, because some people are demanding that Washington, D.C. fix their problems, when in fact this is a problem for our state governor or even your parish police jury or your mayor to fix. And if everybody knows where to place their demands, they'll be more effective in getting things done that government can do for them. So that's how I got into this, and that's where I wound up.
Great, thank you. Dr. Wilson, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, I am Dr. Holly Wilson, and I'm interim chair of the Department of History and Political Science this year. And I am a philosopher and have done some philosophy of history, so I have some connection there. But I'm mostly a philosopher, and I teach religion and have gotten into both subjects when I was at Vanderbilt University as an undergraduate, because I was interested actually in psychology and discovered that psychology was interested in emotions and ethics too. So somehow I wandered over to the philosophy department and discovered that philosophy was a fascinating subject. So then I ended up pursuing that and ended up here and head of the Arts, English, and Humanities department as well. So I care about all the humanities, and including political science and disaster management and emergency management science. I'd like to encourage you to pursue or get some interest in the subjects in this department. One of the exciting things about history is that it's a very well-balanced program, that you get both Western civilization and also American history. And so you can include courses from both subject areas in your degree. And so it's, and we've also been allowed students to take some religion courses in the history of the church to include it in their program. Political science is a fascinating subject, and I'm going to let Dr. Ordes speak about that, and Dr. Rogers has already spoken about how fascinating and open history is to critical thinkers and people who want to delve more into knowing what has happened in history. But anyway, that's my introduction, and I'm open to more questions.
Absolutely. I know that I just want to go through the programs really quickly for those who are watching of the programs offered in history and political science. We do have a Bachelor of Arts in History. We do have a BGS with a political science concentration, a pre-law concentration, and a disaster science and emergency management concentration. We also offer a degree where students can teach history at the local in secondary education in high schools. So did I miss anything?
No, that's it. And I also wanted to say about that, the degree that gives you the minor in education, that allows you to be certified so that when you do graduate, you can get a job as a certified teacher.
Yeah, and I know that teachers are very much needed right now in Louisiana, locally and statewide and nationally. Good teachers are needed, especially in history.
And with respect to that, I just wanted to mention we offer a course. Dr. Rogers offers a course on that helps the students succeed in the praxis exam, which is really a big thing in terms of getting certified.
Hey, Dr. Rogers, do you want to talk a little bit about that class?
Sure. I've offered it now, I guess about a year and a half. It's in Louisiana, the specialization is not history as a discipline. It's actually social studies.
Right.
which anybody who's been in high school in Louisiana sees. So because it's quite not disciplinary focused, it includes a lot of different things: geography, political science, anthropology, sociology, psychology. And, you know, if you had to take, 2 or 3 courses in each one of those things, well, you'd be an undergraduate forever, and nobody wants that. So instead, the way Louisiana does certification, in order to get past this hurdle that we call Praxis 2, I try to encourage people to understand how all of these things sort of relate to each other. Why it is that history is not, it's a distinct discipline, certainly, as it can be studied differently, but it includes these elements of these other things, which are very powerful in their own right and deserve their own attention. So because of Louisiana's kind of unique place, we're the only state that offers a secondary education certification in social studies. Almost all the rest of them either have a very strict discipline, history or political science or geography, or they have a more minimalist approach. Louisiana is much more expansive in this regard. I happen to think that's a good thing, because what that does is that allows everybody to kind of find their place. If they're teaching American history and they don't do anything with geography or political science, or, even something about psychology, even if it's not obvious, they may not really understand American history really well, and vice versa. I mean, if they're teaching civics or free enterprise, right, which is supposed to be economics, right? Well, economics is a very important discipline in its own right, but economics plays on everything else. I think we have to get away from this concept that specialization means you ignore everything else. That's kind of the antithesis, I think, of what people who want to be teachers do, even if they wish to specialize. My specialty has grown increasingly to be economic history, which is almost by definition not history. It's not economics either. I would never claim that. It's an interesting sort of blend of things. And things begin to make more sense when you see connections between topics, between things that you can study. And that I think is really the purpose behind the social studies. And I happen to think it's a much better way to do it. I understand why students find it more difficult, and that's why I want to help them work their way through it with this course. And really, I try to do that in pretty much all of my courses. And I think Dr. Stacy, our other historian, does that too. And I know Dr. Ordes does it too. And here he is telling you about why political science matters because of this funny thing called the Cold War. Well, I can tell you 90% of my students don't even know what the Cold War was. They have this vague sense that it was chilly, or then we all wore sweaters more often or something. These things are powerfully interconnected. And so that's what I try to stress in that particular course, is to show these interconnectedness. The geography isn't out here on a little island all by itself as a discipline. It's related to all of these other powerful forces that you will need to understand better. In fact, it's kind of a coincidence, but just a couple of hours ago, I sent Dr. Ordes a really interesting essay on geopolitics that really struck me as, wow, now here's something we can do in our little, international simulation course that would drive home just how powerful geography is. And you don't have to make that the only thing that it's about. It certainly involves economics. It certainly involves history. It certainly involves all these other disciplines. And so interdisciplinarity, I think, is really a coming thing. So instead of thinking of Louisiana and its emphasis on social studies education as a backwards concept, I happen to think of it as sort of, well, this has real application in everybody's life. And they ought to understand this better, even if you're not going into a classroom, even if secondary education isn't where you're headed. I'd like people to kind of understand it that way a little bit better. I know that was way more than you wanted.
Hey, thank you. So
I can't help but get excited. I'm missing my classes.
well, and that's one thing about
Yeah.
LSUA is that we have passionate instructors. They are passionate about what they teach, and I know that our students feel that, and it helps them learn more, and it helps them get a little bit more involved in the class. So definitely. Dr. Ordes, I'm very interested for you to talk a little bit more about the simulation course. I hear students talk about it all the time, but for students looking at programs to go into, talk to us a little bit more about that course and what our students are learning from that course, what you see as an outcome from that course.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the first half of the semester is classroom theory, some content, but a lot of theory about how countries are supposed to get along with each other in the world or not, as the case may be. And there are, in fact, rules for diplomacy and some tried and true things that work and things that we know that don't work when countries are trying to resolve their differences. And in the second half of the semester, they're going to do practical application of that classroom material while they resolve some crisis they find themselves in. And I think that what the students like most of all is not just getting to put classroom theories into practice in real time, but they like the autonomy of it because they're in complete control of the second half of their semester. They can rise or fall depending on how well they understood the concepts or how well they can apply the concepts. And while it's true that everybody's free to fail in any of these classes, it just doesn't happen because everyone finds a way to rise to the challenge and really run their own country, which is what they're doing. They're running their own country. Somebody could be Russia, somebody could be China, somebody has to be USA. Rarely will anybody be Bolivia, since they're not a world power. Uh, but everybody wants to do something and do well. And there's a lot of pressure on them because nobody wants to look like they didn't get it, they didn't understand it. So they will learn mountains of material on their own that I could not push them hard enough in any class to make them learn these things, but they're self-motivated. And I think it's that autonomy, that the fact that they are really responsible for how well their country does in the simulation. It's sort of self-energizing. You turn them loose and they invariably rise to the challenge. And I've seen students who are otherwise a C student, C plus student, really push themselves hard to bump themselves up a letter grade or two just because this matters to them. And it's a motivator. And that's why it's such a successful formula for running a classroom. They will learn tons of things. And in fact, they will talk about that particular class long after they graduate, whereas they will not talk about their algebra class or their freshman English class. But I happened to walk into the Finnegan's Wake Tavern downtown one evening in the early summer some years ago, and there was a loud argument going on what the Russia team should have done to the USA team in the simulation. And it was my mistake to walk into the place because as soon as they recognized me at the door, they turned to me and demanded that I resolve this issue, this ongoing issue, a month after the semester was over. And they had essentially taken over the tavern with this loud argument. Anyway, it won't happen with somebody's biology lab or their algebra class, but it does with this course. And I think that's why it's so successful is students still talk about it long after they've finished it. And that means they're going to use it in the real world when they're trying to understand why is America doing this in the world? Or why is that country acting that way to USA? They have a much better grasp of it. And that's the real purpose of the course. It's what I wanted them to get out of it is to understand what is our role in the world, what is the role of other countries in the world, and why do we get along better with some than with others when you would think we could all get along. It doesn't turn out that way, but they have better insights so that they become a resource person to somebody who says, I don't understand why we're not getting along with Canada, right? Don't understand why we're doing what we're doing with China. Well, somebody who's taking that class will be able to say, here's what's happening. And once you get the big picture, you can watch it and you'll say, oh, it's so clear now. Because it's not that difficult. It just looks difficult. Does that help?
Yeah.
what I love about what you're describing, Dr. Ordes, is not only do you motivate them to learn, but you also instill leadership qualities in them. And that's something just so valuable in an education.
Well,
Absolutely.
you're exactly right. You can talk about teaching leadership, but making them become leaders, that's an entirely different thing. That's some sort of self-motivating, self-teaching thing. They'll decide how to be a leader of a country team.
Yes.
So, who can talk a little bit about our pre-law concentration? I know a lot of students go and they want to go to law school, and so they think they have to major in pre-law. We've just added that as a concentration, but it's not necessary that they have to major in the pre-law. But who can talk about the pre-law
Yes.
concentration?
Dr. Ordes can talk about that too.
Yes,
Yes.
because we're trying to make it systematic. There is the law school, the LSAT does not require you to have any particular background the way the MCAT to get into med school does. But in this case, we're trying to make it systematic because we do know that some courses hone the mind's analytical skills better than other courses so that somebody can do well on the LSAT, which is the ticket into law school.
Mhm.
And right now we have a hodgepodge of freelancers on the campus who are sending students to law school or attempting to from other majors, whether it's English or humanities or criminal justice. And while the most brilliant students in those disciplines can do well on the LSAT, for everyone else, what they're missing is honing their mind to be razor sharp, which is what the LSAT really rewards, as opposed to being axe sharp, which if you think of those two different cutting tools, can you imagine that analogy of how a shaving razor has to be razor sharp to do the precision work that it does, whereas an axe that has to chop wood, it has a different type of edge on the working surface. And as an example, people in criminal justice are being trained to be sheriff's deputies, prison guards, and other things where you don't need to be a legal scholar. Whereas in law school, the selection of the wrong word on the contract entirely changes the outcome of the meaning of what's in that contract. And now someone is going to lose because the analytical skill to tell the difference between this word choice and that word choice wasn't any good. Which is why people who study English or maybe communication studies, they tend to do well in the LSAT, but they may not have the sharpened analytical skills that it takes. So in our case, in history and political science, the kinds of courses that we teach really do hone the mind to be razor sharp as opposed to axe sharp. Uh, People need to do those other kinds of jobs too. And I'm not trying to disparage them in any way. We need people to be prison guards. We need people to be sheriff's deputies. They do vital work for our society. But if someone decides they want to take the LSAT and go to law school, then telling them to be a CJ major or an English major could be counterproductive. So we're trying to systematize this by calling it a pre-law concentration. I've always been the pre-law advisor, but I have no control over people in other departments sending their students to take the LSAT without my knowledge. But as the pre-law advisor, I get all of their LSAT scores back. We've had someone in another department have to take the LSAT 3 times to gradually and eventually get into law school. Whereas we just had a graduate this spring. He's been accepted to law school already. So in our
Congratulations.
department, we can, I think, minimize the pain and make it less difficult to get into law school than in some other department where they may have successes, but it's why make it harder to put somebody into law school that wants to go to law school? And that's what we're doing.
I have to
In
admit
a
that
systematic way, we're taking that approach.
the curriculum for the pre-law program is excellent, and it includes 2 philosophy courses, which I find is going to really help students do well on the LSAT.
Absolutely, and it includes some communication studies because you have to be able to communicate in the courtroom to persuade a jury. So that being able to speak well it matters. But it also includes some other things like some social psychology because the mind, we understand in many ways how the human mind works. And if you're in the courtroom and as a trial lawyer and you already know where the other lawyer has to go to because you understand their thought processes better, you can get there ahead of the other lawyer. It's a huge advantage in trial. And so I do steer pre-law students to taking psychology courses, some particular ones, communication studies courses, English courses, because again, the choice of a single word in the sentence makes a difference to the outcome. So yes, it's a well thought out program. I think we should push it hard. It's just that it's a recent program since we're trying to make it systematic as opposed to this hodgepodge all across the campus where people in other disciplines say, I want to go to law school. They don't know I exist, so they don't come and ask me, how do I do that?
Right. Do you know, Dr. Ordes, where our graduates are getting into law school? Do you have, is it a particular set of schools that they're applying to and being accepted?
Everybody wants to go to law school at LSU because they don't know if they're going to be doing criminal law or civil law. And criminal law is pretty much standardized across all 50 states. You know, if you murder somebody, you're going to go to trial and probably go to prison. But our civil law uses the Napoleonic Code, and only LSU law teaches that. So if you thought you were going to get into real estate law or family law or anything like that, our Napoleonic Code is only taught here. It's not taught anywhere else, so that everybody wants to go to LSU. So most of our graduates go to LSU. Some go to Southern. We actually have a couple of people in Southern right now that are doing well. The real difference between the two schools is, apart from prestige, and it doesn't really matter out on the job market, but the pass rate for the bar exam is much, much higher at LSU because their LSAT demands on the way in are much higher. Our students can get into Southern with lower LSAT scores, but the Southern rather, bar pass rate, it's around half of what LSU's is, so that people can get a law degree, but will never pass the bar and will never practice law. But on the other hand, they can go work for an insurance company, which State Farm, for example, hires people directly out of law school, and they do not want you to pass the bar because they want to keep you in their company for the rest of your life doing insurance claims, where the lawyer for State Farm phones the lawyer for Progressive and says, your person ran into my person at the traffic accident, and you're going to send me a check for the damages. And they're doing lawyerly work, but they never have to go to court. And these are very good paying corporate jobs. I know people who were doing that even with, say, Loyola Law School degrees, because you don't have to go to trial, you never lose, and the pay is outstanding. The corporate perks are outstanding. And so when people tell me they want to do law school, I ask them, what kind of lawyering do you picture yourself doing 10 years from now? And that's where we find out they have no idea what lawyering is. If we could approach this in a systematic way, we could actually hold some sort of forum or seminar where everybody who thinks they want to go to law school would show up in a classroom one afternoon where we could talk about this and tell them, here's the options that you're looking at. Do you see yourself doing that? You know, when we survey lawyers today, we find out that 2/3 of lawyers wish they hadn't gone to law school and didn't have to be a lawyer. That is not a recommendation for a professional career, because it's not true about surgeons or airline pilots or most everything else, where 2/3 of the people who work with you hate their job and wish they could go do something else. They're trapped in a pathway because somebody told them they could be rich and prestigious as lawyers. So I do tell people that. But there are people who really, they're cut out to be lawyers. They ought to be lawyers, and they'll be great lawyers. And those are the people we can really send on that pathway with good success. We've had a student not so long ago who got a full scholarship to LSU Law School, which, as you know, are rare as hen's teeth. Another student got a full scholarship to Elon Law School in North Carolina, including a stipend to live on while she was at law school.
Wow.
She's not working as a lawyer now because she realized I was right, that 2/3 of lawyers hate lawyering. But she was a smart student, and she got that scholarship and did very well in law school. She just, once she got into the real world of it, she does not like lawyering.
Yeah, and it sounds like you are able to give those students a lot of support and guidance, like when it's time to take the LSAT,
Well,
what
it's true.
are available.
Yes.
Mhm.
And all advisors should be doing this is they should ask in some general way, who are you supposed to be on this planet? Because if I steer people into law school when they really weren't cut out to be lawyers, I haven't done them any favors whatsoever. So the real thing I do as a faculty advisor is to find out where what are you who are you supposed to be on the planet? Let's see how LSUA can be the pathway to your brighter future. I have talked people out of going to law school and instead doing something different in graduate school. We have a student now who's going to graduate school who talked to me about law school in the past year, but he'll be starting graduate school in the fall.
So one other program that's very unique around is our disaster science and emergency management. So who wants to talk about that program?
Well,
Oh, I'll take that one too, simply because that's what I'm doing.
It is.
We probably shouldn't report this too widely, but we're running this program with a skeleton crew of just me and one adjunct who has a master's degree from Georgetown University in emergency management. It's a portion of political science, but it's a very specialized portion of political science, because when the disaster strikes, you either are the government coming to carry out policy to rescue people, or you're a contractor working for the government, like the Red Cross or the Cajun Navy or those kinds of things, or you are a resident somewhere expecting the government to come and save you from your flooded neighborhood or your forest fire or earthquake or whatever the case is. And so understanding what government is prepared to do and not do can be very illuminating, since there are some things that are really on you once the disaster strikes. And if you know what these things are, you'll know what the government's prepared to help you with and which things you'll have to fend for yourself on. And that is maybe the best value coming out of this degree for somebody that doesn't want to go into a career. If you're going to go into a career in this, then you're qualified to work in the government, whether national government, state government, local government, but you can work for a private corporation. Every large corporation has an on-the-scene emergency manager, because, for example, at Procter & Gamble, they have an on-the-scene emergency manager who needs to know when the hurricane comes to town, what is the government planning to do for us, and what do we have to do in-house on our own, not to mention their own hazmat spills in there or a refinery accident or things like that. So you can be working for the public sector, the private sector. You can be working for a nonprofit organization like the Red Cross, Salvation Army, or something like that, helping victims of a disaster. And finally, if you want to work for yourself, you can, this requires some entrepreneurial skills and probably some business courses, but you could style yourself as a consultant, because most small companies do not have a disaster or emergency plan. They don't know that they need one. And after Katrina, most small businesses never came back because they had lost all their records, and they didn't know who they bought supplies from, who they sold their product to. They didn't know they needed a disaster plan to resume operations after the hurricane. And so a consultant, and that's what this person would be, for a small fee could walk into a bakery or a barber shop or an auto parts store and say, for a small fee, I will custom design a disaster plan for you so that if anything goes wrong, you can come back to your operations. And then for a small repeat fee, you can update that every year, every other year, or so on, so that it's sort of like an insurance policy in that it allows these small businesses who can't afford an on-the-scene emergency manager to have a custom designed emergency program so that they can come back to work after the disaster is over. So in that sense, people are performing a public service. In New Orleans after Katrina, they had nearly 1,000 restaurants before Katrina, and after Katrina, it was just 100. So that 900 restaurants could not come back to operation. Now, the New Orleans area is back to that 1,000 again, but we're also 10 or 15 years post-Katrina. But for a little while, all those little mom and pop restaurants could not reopen because they had no disaster plan. So think of that as a public service, that if people knew where they bought their supplies, who their customer base was, what they even did in their business, that's a benefit. Now, if somebody doesn't want to actually pursue a career in this, they can still be a resource person for their family and their friends in their neighborhood, because when the hurricane's coming to town, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there, a lot of rumors. And if you know what the government can and cannot do for you and what kinds of things you're responsible for, you can be a resource person to your family, to your friends, to your neighborhood, because you'll be the calm person saying, here's what we're going to need to do before the hurricane gets here, or whether the waters are rising, or whatever the case is. You can be the calm person who helps everybody else get through the disaster because you understand it better than somebody else looking at social media. So it's a broad base of benefits that I see in a disaster science emergency management education. It can lead to a career, and it can lead to simply being better prepared when the hurricane comes to town, or the earthquake, or the flood, or whatever the disaster is.
Dr. Ordes, didn't we just place a student in a pretty nice position from disaster science emergency management?
Actually, several. We have somebody who just left the Coast Guard and is moving into the private sector. He was hired directly out of the Coast Guard. He's not finished with his degree. He plans to come back to us and finish the degree, but they sent him to Puerto Rico in the private sector because they're still recovering from their 2 hurricanes in the past year or two. So he's working in the private sector, in the field, and his education so far has been sufficient for him to go there, get the job, keep the job, and do that. We have someone else who needed to finish this degree quickly. She just finished this summer. She is being groomed to replace the director of her emergency management agency in North Carolina. When this fellow retires later this year or early next year, she is being groomed to take over that slot. We have another person in the program who hasn't graduated yet. He's in law enforcement in Central Florida, and once his supervisors found out that he was studying this, they took him off of what he was doing with that agency and made him their emergency management expert. So he's gone through some hurricanes there in the past 2 years, and using the education that he's gotten from us already, he needs to finish this degree. But already he's working and using this education in direct application in the field. So what we're teaching is really useful for people when they have to make decisions where lives and property hang in the balance. This education we provide it's priceless because it's getting people to do good jobs at these very necessary jobs.
And just to mention that this program is 100% online. So
it is 100% online, that's correct.
So if students are interested, they don't have to be in Central Louisiana to take this course. And I think that's going to be valuable because I feel like people all over the United States could benefit from our program because there's disasters everywhere.
Absolutely, because we even have a way for the internship. It's intended to be an in-person, on-the-scene internship at someone's local emergency operations center, whether it's their county or at their state government level or at the Red Cross in their hometown. It's supposed to be that. But we have an alternate pathway for people who can't go do an in-person, on-the-scene internship, and that is to earn a string of relevant FEMA certifications, and that string, the relevance will be worked out with the course instructor for the internship. But just as an example, imagine someone who is, I don't know what the politically correct term is now. Imagine somebody who is unable to literally leave home and go to the emergency operations center at their state government. Maybe they're wheelchair bound or on oxygen or whatever their case is. They could earn a string of relevant FEMA certificates and still get a career going, maybe as a consultant or in their local government, without having to be on the scene during the hurricane, which, as you might imagine, the Emergency Operations Center during a hurricane is a wild place to be. And for an intern, this could be overwhelming. So we actually have an alternative pathway for people who are out of state or who are unable to do on-the-scene in-person internships. and they can still earn this degree and either get a career going in this field or simply be more informed when the hurricane comes to town.
And staying with internships, Dr. Rogers, I want to ask you about different internship opportunities in the history department. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We are, we're always excited about internships. It's kind of funny. It's a little secret, although we're not trying to hide it from anyone. But you know, students often, when they're in a program in history, or really anything else for that matter, they kind of wonder, well, what is it that you could do with that? Well, one of the things you could do is actually do what historians call public history, which is kind of the interface between what I would call sort of academic history and the public. In other words, museums, historical sites. We've had a long-running relationship with our friends at Kent Plantation House. We've worked with museums in several different places, including a few out of state for, you know, over the summer sort of things. It's an opportunity to sort of see how the enterprise of public history actually operates. And trust me, it's very hands-on. It's very, you know, here, learn how this thing works, even if it's just for 8 weeks or however long it is, to sort of see what it's like. You think our historians are very fond of libraries and archives. Well, we've been very lucky. We have an archivist here at LSUA. She does a wonderful job, and she's happy to help folks understand that archives turn out to be more than just a place to stick old paper. It has to do with preservation. It has to do with access. It has to do with sort of a coherence of the collection. There's all sorts of aspects to that. And you don't have to become an archivist, but you begin to see sort of more clearly why these things might matter, why electronic storage, it has all kinds of advantages. It has all kinds of disadvantages too. So you have to kind of, you know, measure all these things. We love exposing people to how folks use history, how folks experience it, not just a book or an essay or an article, but how is it that it actually impacts them? How is it that you can perceive these things in different ways? You know, there's been some of that sort of, it's gotten some bad publicity, and I understand why. Because people think history is some objective thing that happened, you know, a long time ago, and we all agree about that. None of that is actually true. It's in fact a way to remind us. Public history reminds us that things aren't the same, that different people look at it differently, that different people enjoy different aspects. If you're into clothing history, that's important. We don't wear the same clothes we did 100 years ago. Why? Well, don't you think that might be useful in helping to understand something if you want to be a fashion designer or if you just want to be aware of these things? And so history isn't this monolithic thing. I guess I'm kind of repeating myself. We want people to understand that history permeates everything.
And it wasn't until college that I realized that. I came in dreading to take history classes because in high school we just learned facts and dates but it's nothing like that in college. You learn it's layer upon layer upon layer in the classes.
Yeah, you had to suffer through the boring stuff in order to get stuff that's actually interesting. But we want our students, LSUA students, to understand that history is everywhere. It's everything. It's everybody. It's that there's no this person's history or that person's history. You make it your own, your way. And we want to help you to understand why that's so and why everybody does it that way. Nobody really does all the rest of this the same way. You know, my colleagues who are helping students who want to become, novelists, they don't all do it the same way, nor do we want them to do it the same way. Why should anybody expect that to be so for any other discipline? And that's what we want people to see. So if you like that interface between sort of the history as an academic discipline and the public, that is what they perceive, what they're interested in, what they're willing to pay for, that's where internships come into play. We've had lots of students take advantage of this in amazingly creative ways. And without fail, the public history folks out there love this. They're begging people. We've got somebody right now down in Dr. Ordes' neck of the woods in Woodward who would love for somebody to come down there and help them sort of begin to wrestle with the history of this sort of state government recreational place, because they have tons of resources, but they don't know what to do with them. And they don't have the kinds of resources to pay somebody to do it, forever and ever, amen. I mean, try to pay a professional historian or a professional anybody to do that would be really expensive. An intern can bring the kinds of sort of classroom skills, if you like, to a place where those things might be applied a lot more pragmatically. And that's why we call our internships practicum. Practica. It's the practical application of these things. People don't think history has practical application, but they're wrong. It happens all the time. You don't have to take a course in it to see that. But if you want to take a course in it to see it, we want to encourage you. We do this all the time. We love these kinds of things. This is the stuff that sort of makes your education powerful for you. It turns it from what somebody else is interested in to what you're interested in. And how do you interface that with somebody else's interest? And how do you see that? It really makes a huge difference in somebody's education. And lots of our students take advantage of, but we would love more people to take advantage of our practicum. Dr. Ordes has practica in political science. I assure you, they get huge mileages out of being connected to somebody at the Rapides Parish Courthouse, or, somebody's political campaign or something like that.
Well, in that case, we call it an internship, but not a practica in political science. It's an internship, and we specifically do not send anyone to work in election campaigns. That would be illegal.
Oh dear.
Now, they can go work in somebody's campaign, and they have, but I cannot send them.
No credit earned.
Right, not as an internship. But on the other hand, the political science internship is very successful because we've placed political science interns in, especially if they want to go to law school, we've placed them in their parish district attorney's office in a number of parishes. We also have an MOU signed with the 9th Judicial District Court downtown, and we're obligated to send them political science interns on a regular basis. And the host there, the court administrator, has an excellent program for anyone thinking about law, because they'll see a lot of different kinds of lawyering happening at the 9th Judicial District Courthouse. But we've also placed interns in U.S. senators' offices and in U.S. representatives' offices. These are people who are more interested in politics than in law. But everyone reports that they really got a lot of insights out of watching the practical application of these things. So I expect it to continue to grow. It's just that it's a per capita thing, and I'm limited to 3 per semester. So some semesters I really don't have anyone, but other semesters I have half a dozen people that want an internship, and I have to sort of stretch them out over time. And somebody can have one next semester or the semester after that, just because I'm limited to 3.
Can you guys talk a little bit about student organizations? Because I know that when students come to college, they want to get involved, and we do have discipline-specific student organizations. Do you guys have one in HIPS that you want to talk about?
Yes, we do have a student organization called CLEO, and we are going to be working very hard to grow it this year. And I think that Dr. Rogers might know something about it. But I also want to mention the fact that our history students have been getting pretty good jobs too, and going on to grad school. And Dr. Rogers can also talk about that.
Okay, Dr. Rogers.
It's, I happen, you know, it's funny because we're a small university. It's real easy to sort of learn people. And so there's a lot of, I mean, I know Dr. Ordes understands this. You feel kind of possessive about these folks. You really do. When they're here and they're doing things in your area, you know, or in things that you care about, you pay closer attention to them. You know, they just wander by you in the hallway and say hello and, you know, drop something on you or this is exactly the kind of experience that you know, when I was an undergraduate, I went to an undergraduate institution of about 10,000, which is about, you know, 3 times as big as LSUA. Now, anyways, maybe in the future it'll be bigger. And but I still felt that even as an undergraduate, you had this very powerful sense that there were folks who were looking out for you, who were paying attention to you. And so, you know, it's true, our CLEO organization hasn't really flourished recently because I think it was originally established not to make somebody do something, but because students wanted to do something. And so if they were the ones who wanted to do the initiatives, if they wanted to participate in our, you know, our great the campus activities and things like that, we wanted to be there to help them and fill out the stupid paperwork and, you know, worry about all the dumb administrative stuff that we get saddled with. So they don't have to worry about it. They can just go out and have fun with each other and things like that. Frankly, we just need you know, we may need a rethink on that because people think that, oh, it's connected to history. I have to be a history man. No, you don't. We just want people who are interested in something, you know, so that you share this stuff. I have a hard time with my online students trying to get across the idea that in online courses, you have these things called forums, which are not really discussions. They're intended to sort of say, hey, you guys all have something in common. You all look at it a little differently too. Why don't you all, you know, kind of figure out what's interesting and useful and fun and deal with it that way. And instead of it being kind of a graded thing or you have to do this thing or something like that, they don't, our students today, let's be clear, students are busy. They're busy, busy, busy. There has to be a sort of a payoff, if you like. And I don't mean that in any negative sense. What I mean is they have to see the value of it if you ask them to do stuff. So anyways, CLEO had been very active in the past. The last couple of years is kind of hasn't, mostly because students really have not been interested. I mean, beyond asking, hey, is there a club to join? No, that's not how it works. You make the club. You decide what you guys want to do. If you all want to go to Ken House together and have one of their, you know, their little fireplace lunches, you guys, that's exactly the kind of stuff I want to encourage and figure out a way to do. I'm not interested in kind of making something for somebody. Now, you know, if we were bigger, things might be different. You know, it might have, you know, a different route to go. You know, we're a very small department. Now we're smaller department. I don't want the people in political science or even DSEM, even though they're 100% online, to feel like they're being excluded from some great thing. I want to sort of reconceptualize what CLEO maybe should have been, but the students who created it kind of didn't see it that way at that time. And so, you know, that's an ongoing discussion in our department. But we need to send a clearer message, I think, from our department, not just individually, but collectively. We think about students. We care about what's good for you. We want you to understand we're listening. We're not just telling you, we're listening. And that your success makes us look good. And that's why we want you to succeed. We're here to help, whatever that takes. I know all of the three of us, in our department with Dr. Wilson, that's what we care about. We're not so much concerned about the structure, the organization, or any of that stuff. What we really care about is every student feels like they're valued. Every student feels like that whatever it is that they care about can get some attention. It can't always be like that, but we try. We really do. And we're listening. If there's a way to make it better, for heaven's sakes, help us make it better. You think there's a better way to do this student organization? I'm listening. I'm on board. I'm with it.
And that's the great thing about an institution like LSUA and our size. And we just have such caring faculty everywhere, but in history and political science for sure. So we do have to wrap it up, but I have one more question that I want both Dr. Rogers and Dr. Ordes to answer. Is what is your favorite thing about LSUA and teaching at LSUA?
Well, the easy answer is students.
Mm-hmm.
That's the truth. I gave up a job in a different place, doing something different to come here and teach undergraduate students. That was what I did. That's what I signed up for. I wasn't able to do that where I was. And so I needed to be someplace where it was. Now, being in Louisiana, I'm from West Monroe. Okay? Alexandria is kind of a funny place compared to West Monroe. But regardless of where people come from to here, students are amazing. They're simply amazing. And I don't think they understand just how attractive it is to people like me, to professors, that they are different, that they are amazingly different, and that they come with these different experiences, these different perspectives, and that we could sit around and talk more. It's, as soon as this stupid epidemic is over, we need to have more coffee and sit around and just talk, because I read about these sort of, combative perspectives, and I never find that at LSUA. I mean, maybe it's just because we're from the South or from Louisiana. As long as you can be nice to each other and have food, we'll all be fine. Maybe that's it, but I'm not convinced. I'm convinced it's because you see real human beings, right? You see me in class. You see me online, you see that I make mistakes. You see that when you tell me, hey, look, that may not be right. Oh, you're right. I see where I messed up. There's a humanizing element about it. I don't say we don't care about excellence. We do. We think all of our people have excellence, but they don't all have the same. Let's find where you're excellent and push that some. Be excellent on your own, in your own way, in your own mind. Quit worrying about what other people think. And stop caring so much about what kind of grade you got on something. Try to realize that the essence of who you are is not assessed by anybody else. It's only assessed by you. Get there. We're here to help. We want to help. That's why students are powerful. That's why the people who are at LSUA like being at LSUA and stay here, despite the fact we're not paid real well. Oops, can you bleep that out?
That's true. Thank you for that. Dr. Ordes, do you have an answer?
I have to agree. It's all about the students. There's really nothing else. Not to disagree with Dr. Rogers, but we have parking problems on campus. That's not fun. We have drainage problems on campus, and that's not fun. Sometimes I think I've seen cleaner restrooms at truck stops, and that's not fun. But when it comes to the students, they're the best that I've seen anywhere, and I've taught at a number of different campuses. But once they understand what our task at hand is, they always throw themselves into it, and we make this journey together every semester. And while every class is different, the results are always the same. And they tell me, I didn't think I was going to learn anything in American government. or I didn't think I was going to learn anything in this class. And instead I go home and over the dinner table, I'll tell my parents what I learned in class today. Uh, we've got a mom coming back to school now who just put her daughter through, who just graduated this past spring. It's her turn to come back now and finish her LSUA degree. And she said that the daughter, her first class was with me, and that set the tone of her LSUA education for the entire time she was here. When I get feedback like that, that's the real payoff. There's nothing else that LSUA can give to me besides somebody saying that you made a difference in my family, in the higher education that we have and use. That's what I'm doing. That's my mission. That's my crusade, to try to help create an educated middle class in a part of the state where there might not be much of one if LSUA did not do what it does for people who can't go off to big name university or go off to someplace else and live for 4 years. That's not our typical student. We have people that couldn't get higher education except for what we do. That's what I do, and I'm just saying I get that payoff quite frequently.
Well, thank you guys all for joining me today and having this conversation. And we hope that this will inspire students to consider history, consider political science, our disaster science and emergency management. And if they have questions about the program, you can definitely reach out to hips@lsua.edu or reach out to admissions@lsua.edu, and we can connect you with this great department. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks everybody. Thank you, Shelley.